Anor Londo is one of the worst wastes of potential in the entire game. You run down the stairs from where the gargoyles dumped you, and you're introduced to a new enemy by itself. This is good. In the very next room, there are two of the same enemy that must hate each other because they don't give a shit when you pull one individually away to kill. You rest at the bonfire and then ride the elevator down to a repeat of the Bell Gargoyle. If you didn't get a chance to chop off a tail in the boss fight, you can do it now. After that, you seemingly come to a dead end. Looking around the area, perhaps even going back up the elevator and finding the blocked entrance to Duke's archives, you finally realize that the game expects you to jump onto a jagged piece of roof and climb up something that looks like you have no business climbing. On my first playthrough, I only figured this out because a player message was written on it. This isn't the best level design, but it's better than what's coming up. Through a broken window, you find some enemies and a ladder leading to a path across some ceiling joists. If you look carefully here, you can see that these wooden beams aren't even wide enough for your character to stand on. Both of his feet are floating in the air around it. This is another part of the game that is trivial for anyone playing with a ranged attack, especially sorcerers. On the other side, you jump down and learn how to control the central elevator that can be used to open the path to the Painted World and to another bonfire. You carry on toward what I believe is the central part of a castle and fight more of the giants. You now also have to fight the brain gargoyles that can fly, but only sometimes. Knocking them off the ledge here makes me really wonder about the game's level of polish. They clearly have wings and were just shown to be flying when carrying you from Sen's Fortress. I really don't understand this. If they couldn't get the enemy working properly, why is it even in the game? The next section is widely considered to be the biggest incident of bullshit in Dark Souls and ranks high in all of gaming. I can't really emphasize that enough, and if you've played the game before, you knew this was coming. I'd like to add that I think people often overlook the smaller piece of bullshit right before the archers, the two gargoyles on the platform. How are you meant to kill these? If you run in and fight, the archers will pelt you the whole time. If you try to fight them on the edge of the roof, they'll likely knock you off. You literally can't lure them back to make it a fair fight. Their models are too big to fit through the narrow gate. What usually ends up happening is that they try to follow you up and end up killing themselves by running right off the roof. Again, these are creatures that have wings and can fly. Dashing up to face the archers looks pretty epic, but I can't think of any other moment in the game that is as awkward as when you finally do get up there and start humping shields with the knight. The most consistent way to get past here is to get him to attack you until he knocks himself off the ledge. This can sometimes happen in a few seconds or a few minutes. There's so much wrong here. The knockback inflicted by the arrows is excessive. Any slight movement made when you're toe-to-toe with the knight can send you falling. You can't have the camera pointing at both knights together when you reach the top, meaning that one of them can often get free shots at your back. Sometimes people state that they can do this part first time, every time, and therefore it's not bullshit, so here's a time lapse of me doing it 7 times in a row without dying. I still think it's bullshit. The rest of the area is great. The knights inside the castle are a solid, fair enemy. There are many mimics in this area, and if the first one didn't teach you a lesson, from here on you'll attack every chest before you open it. The wasted potential I mentioned earlier is in the layout of Anor Londo. There's been less interconnectivity between the levels since Blighttown, and I feel like this place was meant to be a return to that layout. There are many unused doors and shortcuts that aren't really useful. I think that there should have only been one bonfire in this entire level, right before the central elevator where the first gargoyle was. Without changing much in the level itself, you can still go through the joists and manipulate the elevator, only now the bonfire is positioned in a way that doesn't require you to call and move it every time you die. If keeping the archer segment is really necessary, you could open this set of doors once you get into the castle instead of lighting another bonfire. Finally, you could open the main entrance before Ornstein Snow like you still can, only now it's close to the same bonfire and is roughly the same distance away from the one currently used for that boss. The end of Anor Londo is the second big spike in difficulty in Dark Souls, and the game never really gets more difficult after this point. Like the Bell Gargoyles, I don't think it's a coincidence that there is another smith in this area to provide a means to upgrade your gear while you're trying to fight this boss. I have a lot to say about Ornstein Snow, and it incorporates a lot of the game's core mechanics. This boss is often heralded as the game's crowning achievement. Some of the things people say about this fight near cringe-inducing levels of adoration to the point that I'm a little nervous about criticizing it. I think it's a good fight, but it is by no means a fair fight, and I don't just mean because it's 2-on-1. After all, it's not just Ornstein and Snow you're fighting, it's also the game's camera, and the entire development team at From. First off, let's get the repetition out of the way. The boss has two targets and that immediately hampers the game's combat system. The only saving grace here is that Snow moves so slowly that you can often control how much you deal with both of them attacking you at the same time. Other parts of the fight aren't so justifiable. Ornstein can often get stuck or hide behind Snow, which makes it so you can't see what he's doing. This wouldn't be so bad except that he has the ability to throw lightning at you, which has the same issue as all other projectiles in the game. It can smoothly and harmlessly pass through enemy models and still hit you. Making enemy projectiles damage other enemies would be easily exploitable, and I can understand why they chose not to have the game work that way. But surely the solution would be to just make it so enemies block the projectile but still take no damage. Or, in this specific case, the lightning could hit Snow and temporarily empower him with lightning so it prevents the random bolts coming at you, but also adds a mechanic to the fight. Ornstein also has a rapid dash attack that looks cool but is unfortunately buggy. Just look at this. Look at it. Is he stuck? Is the attack over? What the fuck is he doing? Then he snaps forward, sometimes right behind you, and gets his hit in anyway. This is the best time to talk about how different the game can be depending on how each player chooses to play. At the basic level, your class selection can determine a lot. So can loot drops or what weapons each player tries and decides that they like. These are all good things that can add variety to the game and increase replayability. Dark Souls also has a lot of tools in order to help players of varying skill levels. Farming, kindling, phantoms. I haven't spoken about the multiplayer until now because I thought this would be the best place for it. I also want to show another example of how magic works in the game. I didn't know you could summon other players or phantoms during my first playthrough. I like to think that I wouldn't have resorted to it if I had known, but I'm not so sure. Many people believe that Ornstein and Snow aren't meant to be killed solo. I don't agree with this statement, but I still think it's interesting. Specifically, it raises several questions about the intended methods for getting through different parts of the game. Are you meant to use magic? Are you meant to summon outside help? Some of you may be screaming right now that there is no meant, or there is no right way to play the game, and that the different methods are all there to offer different ways to play. And you're right. At least, you're sort of right. Ornstein and Snow show that some ways of playing Dark Souls are just flat out better, flat out easier. My first character was a knight with a longsword and a shield. My first kill of Ornstein and Snow took a long time, and I'm not talking about attempts, I'm talking about the actual duration of the fight when I killed them. It's all about keeping the two of them in front of you and constantly retreating when both are close. You keep your shield up and wait for Ornstein to race ahead and jab at you, then you counterattack and hope that he doesn't randomly skip away. When you do hit, you take off a little shaving of his health, and then you resume to backing away and do the whole thing all over again. Contrast this with summoning Solaire, who isn't even another player, and you have a tank who keeps Snow busy and you can just circle around Ornstein and safely destroy him. Contrast this even more with magic and, well, it's really easy to throw spells constantly when you can keep at range and never have to worry about getting too close to both of them. I hate to harp on about this, but playing Dark Souls as a caster turns the game into a third-person shooter in a world where you're the only one with a gun. Seriously, the clip that's been playing sped up all this time is what this fight looks like for a sword and shield character who is level 50. It's sped up because if it was played in real time it would last for 8 fucking minutes. Here's the fight done with another solo level 50 character, only this time with spells. Look at how disgusting this is. It's for this reason that it's hard to gauge other players when they talk about having an easy time with certain bosses. Ornstein Snow weren't as bad as everyone said. I just summoned a friend and we split the bosses apart and then I cast Soul Spear and... I touched on this point earlier with the undead dragon in the Valley of Drakes, but I really have to wonder what the developers want the players to do in certain situations. There are so many instances in the game that a ranged attack is near mandatory, and yet it's never explained like the other fundamentals. For anyone thinking that From wanted players to figure it out for themselves, the other essential mechanics are spelled out quite literally in messages burned into the floor. All classes could have been given a ranged weapon or a simple spell in the Asylum. There could have been some sort of test, like a key hanging from the ceiling somewhere, that needed to be hit with a ranged attack in order to retrieve so that players become used to using something other than melee weapons. Sorcerers and pyromancers are both given a shield. All classes are actually, even the deprived. It's clear that blocking is a core system in the game and that choosing not to use it is an optional challenge. Why not do the same here with range attacks? As the game is now, I often feel like I'm cheating when I resort to ranged weapons and spells. Many groups of enemies don't even react to being shot. It looks broken because it is broken. I've read Ornstein Snow described as a dance between the bosses and the player. It can certainly feel that way sometimes with constant movement and ducking and dodging around the pillars. The key difference is that you're never an active participant in this dance. If you're fighting alone, you're forced to passively move away from them until the programming aligns in a way that provides you with an opening for an attack, and then you have to hope that Ornstein doesn't jump away before it lands. I never die to this boss anymore. I also never have a fun time either because it's so boring to wait sometimes more than a minute to attack without taking damage.
Oh, chosen undead.
If you include the DLC areas, receiving the Lord Vessel after Ornstein Snow is roughly the halfway point in Dark Souls. There are 4 paths left to explore in the base game, and I firmly believe there is a dramatic drop in quality at this point. The DLC saves the game from becoming awful in its final act.
You have the Lord Vessel.
Before moving on to those areas, I want to briefly speak about the Painted World. This is an optional secret area that you access by having the peculiar doll in your inventory. You get this by returning to your prison cell in the Asylum. This is a secret area that leads to another secret area, and it's commendable that such a big chunk of content is left hidden away. The Painted World is an outstanding level and is the only other place in the game that recaptures the interconnected feeling of Undeadburg. It loops around on itself and takes you through many paths in order to unlock doors so you have a direct run to the fog gate at the end. The issues I have with this level are minor. The Harpy ambush at the top of the tower should have only been one of the monsters at first. Introducing two at the same time doesn't give the player a chance to learn their attack patterns. The Bloated Hollows releasing Toxic is also exceedingly punishing for melee players, especially given the fact that you're stuck in this level until you find a way out, and there's no source of blooming moss to cure Toxic status. Crossbreed Priscilla is an optional boss that I didn't kill on my first playthrough because she wasn't hostile.
If thou seekest I, thine desires shall be requited not.
She's a little underwhelming, but it's an interesting idea to have to look for her footsteps in the snow and then attack before rolling away. If this boss had been at the same caliber as, say, Quelaag, then Painted World would have been hands down my favorite level in the game.